page 1. If you've written page 1 well, you're going to do great, okay? So here's what you need to do. They're going to read quickly, efficiently, reviewers are. This is the most likely section they're actually going to read, and they may only be reading the first page of your proposal, so you want to get it right. We're going to talk about structure, okay? And that's where we're going to get to the real nitty-gritty here, okay? Of what a good page 1 is going to look like, and you're going to see why this is a good idea, but a very bad grant proposal. It's the first paragraph, and I wrote it myself, thank you. The most critical element of your proposal is this first paragraph. It's going to determine if they're going to get their attention. You've heard this before. Overstate rather than understate your study. What does that mean? We tend to be doctoral students. We want to qualify, add all this qualify. This is the moment to not exaggerate, not mislead, not be inauthentic, but not be overly conditional in the way. You want to say that this is a truly important study, you're going to be making a contribution. At the same time, I think I like Chris Ren's advice, you don't want to be kind of, go over the top there, talk about too many gaps or be too grand. But you want to get right to the point. Communication is a one-way communication. They don't get to ask you any questions about your first paragraph. Here's what it needs to do. The very first sentence, this is when Mike was talking about cramming stuff in. Your first sentence has to cram 3 things in there. What's relevant to the agency? It has to have the right words, the concept, ideas. What's the distinctiveness of your proposal? What's the obvious relative advantage that you're going to keep repeating throughout the proposal and highlight? You need to capture their imagination. You need to say something unique, like Mike was saying with this evolution idea. Something that really sparks their imagination, a new way to think about something. And this is in that art of writing a proposal. You also need to identify the critical need. In other words, the thing you're thinking about in that very first sentence, the very first paragraph, what is the need you're addressing? Not the question you're addressing, what is the need? And Mike was saying to put it in a broader context. What is the need that you're going to be talking to, that if this study is addressed, it's going to advance the mission of the agency, and it's going to make a meaningful contribution to society as a whole. So think need, not what your project is, but what need is your project about. That's the context of this. Critical need sentences must have keywords that identify what your proposal is about immediately. If you're going to use technical terms or ideas, those need to be kind of those ideas need to be kind of front and center. If you're going to be reintroducing ideas, you have to be very selective. We'll talk about that too. Immediately relate to the mission of the agencies, but it can't reiterate knowledge that's obvious to the reviewer. So let's look at our sample proposal. There's ego. And our sample proposal says this. 5.5 million children in this country have at least one parent who's an undocumented immigrant. Now, on the one hand, that's a shocking statistic. When I read that, I didn't know that. So in some ways, this does a pretty good job of introducing because it grabs my attention. It's something I did not know. Think of what is something you think you could do that would kind of rephrase that. If you kind of think through what kind of Chris Ren was saying, what are some ways, give me some example sentences that might rephrase that to make it a little bit stronger. If you're thinking about Jack Kent Cooke, low income, high achieving, helping people make educational pathways, succeed in future, how would you maybe phrase it?
Over 5 million instead of about 5.5.
Over 5 million. Okay, that makes it a little bit stronger. Okay.
Well, I'm not sure. The whole foundation talks about high achieving low income students, and so far we don't know anything about high achievement of the students or the income level of their parents. We have to assume that being undocumented means that you have a lower socioeconomic status. So rather than saying, oh my gosh, look at all these, we should probably say something like, I don't know.
But you're right. We should say something about, if we find out something about students that are successful in achievement, we might be able to help students that we know are falling behind. So we know something about high achievement. So based on Jack Kent Cooke, what I would try to highlight is this. What do we know about achievement? What are the enabling conditions as opposed to the limiting factors? A lot of times people focus on those.
Right.
Jack Kent Cooke, what are the enabling conditions? So you kind of want to get some of that language in there. And if you look at their website, you'll see that I kind of incorporate some of that here. Anything else you think could really grab the reviewers, maybe imagination, capture their attention?
I think maybe speaking proportionally, like in this country, so rather 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 or whatever the proportion is, because then it kind of puts a picture on, okay, I've got 20 kids in front of me. It creates a more vivid picture, I think, than 5.5 million. It's hard to imagine 5.5 million and does that relate to the population of the country?
Great point. Proportionality. How does a reviewer know? I mean, is that a lot? How many children do transition from elementary to junior high each year? I don't really know that number. And it's vague. It's this country. Again, it's trying to talk in concrete language. So maybe something that's more grabbing or specific. Maybe it's a region, or maybe it's just saying the name of the country, U.S.
Even if you know the country numbers, it's probably pretty unlikely that you know the number of children or in the situation. So my guess is the proportion is fairly high, but I don't know without, those numbers are not, for an average reader, I don't think you have that at your fingertips.
Okay, yeah.
Also,
Great,
I
all great
think
points.
for a proposal like this, you need to indicate the sources of this data, because that's quite important. Where do you got the numbers?
Yeah. Yeah, great. Indicates it. And again, one of the ways you lend credibility, you usually get, with these things, you get about 10 or 15 sources. You don't get lots. So you have to, you have to use your sources very wisely. You want to cite really great sources, really contemporary. I've seen proposals sometimes that will say, we know that, children struggle with the transition from elementary to junior high, 1974, this person. It's like, no, say something, in this case, you want to say something very contemporary because you're making a contemporary argument. Cite a very reliable source, maybe something that the reviewer might know, a national report. So let's think, here's a different way to say it. And we're going to incorporate, this is just a sample. There's not a right answer, but you'll see that as we brainstorm, we can rewrite the sentence. Almost half of the 800,000 children of the undocumented immigrants transitioning from elementary to junior high each year quickly fall behind because they lack the reading skills necessary to complete their education. We're bringing in Jack Kent Cooke. We're talking about completion. We're talking about achievement. We're giving a sense of proportionality. So we're beginning, and I think even that sentence could be reworked. But I'm just giving you an idea. When you read your first sentence, I want you to begin thinking, is it about the agency? What's my critical need? And then what am I addressing? So you're writing at the very beginning of your thing, not throughout the whole thing. Okay, so at the beginning, you're writing for the non-expert. You need to do what Mike was suggesting. Mike was saying it should be somebody who's not an academic, should grab and understand what you're talking about. Academics we tend to be in our own little worlds. So write for the non-reviewer. Make sure people highlight the important knowns. You'll get one or two of these important knowns. So really think, what are the one or two things that that reviewer needs to know that's going to really heighten the contrast of the idea I'm just going to bring up. And then finally, orient the reviewer to your conceptual framework. Okay, very subtly begin to bring up ideas or ways of thinking or ways of framing an issue that you're going to introduce later. And I'm not talking about technically say your conceptual framework, but kind of subtly begin to orient people towards a framework to understand the problem. So yes.
How do you work in writing for the non-expert and educate them with important knowns with the bullet on the last slide that was like, must not reiterate knowledge that was obvious to a reviewer? How do you balance that?
I think it's a tension. And I think the way you would balance it is, I think every grant proposal is unique in that respect. And I would probably just hand it to people and ask for their feedback and to say, okay, I'm going to hand it to the non-expert. Does this grab them? Does it talk in plain language? The reason I brought up TED Talks is because here you have people who, if you read their technical journal articles, are very sophisticated and they introduce problems. But when they introduce themselves, like, I've always been interested in how the human brain, how the human brain works under stress. Well, they use this very common language that does engage you, but it uses very everyday. So I think the best test is not even, that's why I say even a principal, is really just having this group around you of some non-experts, some people who are not in your field, and have different people read it to say, does this grab you? Is this doing what I hope it's doing? It doesn't have to grab you, but is it accomplishing what I'm hoping it's accomplishing? Does that help? Okay. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I don't think there's provide just enough background so they grasp the significance, so it's clear. Oh, how it's clear to the wider world. This is the point Mike was making. You're not just answering a question about educating elementary kids. You're answering some other questions too. So think about related questions. Like Mike was saying, what are some larger social issues that your dissertation might speak to? Not in kind of a speaking beyond the data kind of way or grandiose kind of way, but every issue often to be a microcosm of larger social issues. So what are some larger perennial social justice, social-oriented issues that you can speak to? I mean, I blew with some of your work with community colleges and using technology could speak to larger social issues than just community colleges or just the use of technology in education. And so there's something to be said with that. Enough background, introduce essential pieces, say why addressing this is important. 2 or 3 different, and here's what I say. Here's one way to loosen your thinking, kind of to address your earlier question. If you want, just come up with, one of the ways to loosen your thinking is come up with 2 or 3 different introductory paragraphs and force yourself to do it. So you realize there's different ways to think about this. There's not just one way. I'm not trying to find the right one way that's the winner for Spencer. I'm going to come up with 3 different ways, and I'm going to get feedback. And it's kind of like it's kind of like peer review. If you've gotten feedback, the reviewers often contradict themselves and say, well, what do I do? People gave me opposite information. But often, I guess what Mike was talking about is that synthesis is generative. It doesn't have to be reconciled. So the idea of having a few different drafts, it can produce a generative 4th draft. Does that make sense? Okay. So, second paragraph, you have a solution. So let's look at the very beginning, critical need. One of the things this first paragraph does too is it wanders off into territory. It starts talking about legislation, it starts talking about Kansas and Alabama. Really interesting, provocative information, but it misleads me. I'm beginning to think this is about legislation or policy or some kind of state, but it's not. So even though it's interesting, it kind of loses some focus there. So second paragraph, you have a solution. You have the solution. You need to state very clearly what your objective for this proposal is. What is your objective for this particular research study? And then the research questions. You might notice in the second paragraph here, it's not clear what the research questions are. If you read Mike's Spencer dissertation, right up front, first page, I can scan it. It's like a CV. If you've heard advice on CVs or resume writing, like anything you want them to see, put on the first page. Your research questions need to be on the first page. They don't have to be bullet pointed. You don't have to call them research questions if that's not natural language, but you need to be have to use the exact language of these are the questions that this study is going to answer. And then finally make linkages with your questions to what you just said is the critical need. So how you frame the language you use for those questions to do that. So let's look at this. Here's a good example. The goal of the research project is to ensure all children of undocumented immigrants succeed in reaching sufficient reading proficiency. What could be better stated about that in terms of like the objective?
What's sufficient?
What's sufficient is kind of vague language.
Well, and that's a pretty lofty goal, because how are we going to find all the children? How do we know what they are, right? So I'd probably say something like, the goal of the project is to figure out something about what Jack Kent Cook would like. What is associated with success for children who have a start in life that is particularly whatever.
Exactly, yes.
Troublesome or difficult, or maybe it's,
And maybe your research questions for your dissertation are phrased slightly differently, but maybe you want to slightly rephrase them to excellent. Any other quick thoughts?
It's still a bit passive for what we're trying to do. It's like, the goal is like, no, this research project will.
Yeah, it doesn't say will. Yeah, it doesn't sound confident, and it's fuzzy.
it sounds like the mission of the foundation.
So one of the things you can do at this part, and this is just a suggestion, you can say, here's my long-term goal. Mike was saying they want to see a research trajectory, not just a project. So one of the things you might consider doing is say, I have a long-term goal, and here's my goal. I don't have this fuzzy goal of to ensure this, because that's kind of fuzzy. How do you know you reached that goal? Do you ever reach that goal? You never reach that goal. But listen how this goal is different. I'm going to determine the factors in the context, which by the way is the exact wording from the Jack Kent Cook Foundation website, that predict successful transitions to junior high, in order to advocate for state and local district policies and programs that ensure children of undocumented immigrants achieve their full academic potential. Again, words from Jack Kent Cook. My point is, you know when you've identified factors and contexts. Now, they may not be the final say, but you'll know when you've achieved that goal. It's very clear, it's not fuzzy. My objective is to look and see, okay, so here's another long-term goal. My objective is to look and see what effects of after-school reading program has on the preparedness of elementary age students for junior high. Well, look and see. We're going to go over that. That's kind of a fuzzy way to say it. It could be really tightened up, and you don't know. You're going to look and see. What are you really going to do? My objective for this project is to determine the key factors and contexts that enable children of undocumented immigrants to develop reading proficiencies to successfully navigate their transition to junior high. So you're connecting this project to a larger academic goal. You want to make sure the research questions are clearly stated, not hard to find, and why this proposal and why you're the applicant to do. So one of the things you might want to do is, and this, again, I guess what's nice is these themes keep on coming up, is if possible and you've collected pilot data, say something in that second paragraph like, in addition to my pilot data, I've already conducted a study, I've kind of prepared here, my multilingual background, ooh, interesting personal story, I have actively engaged in after-school reading programs in the district for the past 5 years. During this time, I've established strong working relationships with school administrators, teachers, parents, and other after-school program volunteers. Why am I saying that? Because I'm convinced that I'm the person to do the study. I don't have to spend 3 months making relationships. I already have the relationships. I already have the interest. I have a personal story. I've done this for 5 years. I have a trajectory. I have a long-term goal. Please fund me. Okay. And by the way, you're going to be in that stack that, if you do this, you're going to be in the stack that Mike was talking about in terms of the top proposals. It's easy to miss these little small things, but you want to make sure and put everything in the context of everything else. Third paragraph, you want to see the significance of your study. And you'll see that that's almost missing, it's really fuzzy in this thing. And it's one of the things you don't often really pay much attention to in a dissertation proposal in the same way you might in a grant proposal in this case. Okay, you need to say the significance, ready, from the agency's point of view. Pretend the agency made up this study, they could do anything. You have to say what's significant to them. So with your dissertation, you're saying broadly to education and broadly what you hope it's significant. But then you need to be very selective. Okay, of those things I've argued for, what selectively am I going to say that this agency is going to say that's significant? If they, if this was a Family Feud or whatever, you have to pick, with the top, 3 top reasons the agency is going to pick. Pick the 3 top reasons for your proposal that the agency is going to pick. Don't list 5. List the best 1. List the best 2. Make sure it's significant from there. Crisp, credible, specific impacts. What I mean, this isn't just any significance. It's significance to the agency, and it has to be of high significance. Again, this is the time to really state strongly your goals. Simple, direct sentences, and then I'm going to give kind of some prescriptive advice. Put this one sentence in italics. Make it impossible to miss. What is the significance of the study? Let's say it's the kind of word exercise I do with people. Imagine your study is wildly successful. Everything goes as planned, and the results are really, significant and meaningful. Why? What's different the next day? And really have that in your mind. And so this is one of the ways, again, to distinguish your work, to begin to make the argument for the obvious relative advantage of your study. So you can see here significance. This study will improve our understanding of the effects of educational programs and family circumstances on reading preparedness of children of undocumented immigrants as they transition elementary to junior high. Okay, it's not, what is it going to do? It's going to improve our understanding. We're going to say weak word. I'm going to give you a list of weak words. You don't want to say improve our understanding. Very weak word. A different way to say that would be I'm going to identify the key factors and contexts that will allow 400,000 children whose parents have limited educational opportunities to overcome these challenges, circumstances, and excel academically. This is language from Jack Kent's website. And what am I going to say? I'm going to say, guess what? If we find this out, 400,000 more children are going to be able to excel. And I just put a very concrete number behind that for Jack Kent. You invest in me and my project and my research, you're going to be able to tell your donors that 400,000 more children are going to be able to, well, you're going to be able to tell your donors, we're going to know something about helping 400,000 more children excel academically, and that's going to help you in terms of raising money for your foundation. Give specific examples and go beyond the conference and report. You're not just going to disseminate these findings. You're going to tell them to specific people. Wildly successful, complete your project, identify the specific results, name the stakeholders. Who are these stakeholders? Think about your project. A government agency, nonprofit agency, academic communities, possibly regional communities, maybe a school district would be interested in this. List the conferences, agencies, and publications who will be informed of the results. Again, this isn't that you should have a list of 12 different things you're hoping to do, but come up with that list of 12 different things and highlight 1 or 2 or 3 really compelling ways that this study is going to significantly contribute to the agency's mission and knowledge, but also to other sources of knowledgeable, other stakeholders. Avoid generalities. So here's our hit list. Never say study the effects of, explore the reasons for. These aren't significant statements. Better understand why. They're just kind of fuzzy. How do you know you really did that? The meaning of your thing. So this research study will not only advance our knowledge about this under-researched population of students. Chris read, gap of knowledge? Okay, tell me something else. Tell me something new. It will inform state and federal policymakers as they write legislation affecting children of undocumented immigrants. Okay, that's a good start. how would you consider, if you're going to be a ruthless editor, what are some ways you might suggest changing that significant statement to make it more concrete?
Right, what the children are going to get out of it, like how their future is going to be impacted instead of advancing this nebulous our knowledge.
Yeah, be very concrete about what it might be. I mean, this is where you can really speak almost individually about a child's experience, about this, you know, imagine the difference this would make for a child who's, you know, and speak within that. You could very much, that would be persuasive.
It seems like that first clause is not really, that will not only advance our knowledge and blah, 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 like that doesn't seem very necessary. And if you have a limited amount of words, use the words you have wisely and get to the more important impact.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's fuzzy.
And through what mechanisms are you going to inform the state and federal policymakers?
Through what mechanism? Yeah. What specific ways are they going to be? You know, you're going to send them an email, you know, and let them know because they've been waiting for this study. All you know, they're just you know, yeah, it's fuzzy. And one of the things to point is you know this. My thought is we all inherently know that these things need to be in there. It's looking at the first page of your proposal to say first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph. On the first page of my proposal, everything's there. Research questions are there, significant statements there, really compelling, grabbing sentences there. It's all on the first page. So here's something, you know, I say, this study will identify the key factors and contexts that allow children whose parents have limited educational opportunities to overcome these challenges, these challenging circumstances and excel academically. But here's where you get kind of specific. You could get specific. And this is just a sample, okay? You could rewrite this and make this better writing. I'm not saying it's great writing, it's just better writing than what I did originally. In addition to presenting at national academic conferences, you kind of get that out of the way, I will submit a 5-page summary report highlighting the project's major findings and policy recommendations to key stakeholder groups. Both State Representative Mark Meadows and Jerlene E. Daniel, Executive Director of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, have expressed interest in the findings of my study. See attachments. You can put some letters from them. And this is obviously best case scenario, strongest way to do it, but you see you're making a very strong argument. I've already talked to these people. I'm going to give them a 5-page report. They're going to be able to read that. They're not going to read my dissertation. And then it's going to have some concrete impact. So you're talking about mechanisms as well as stakeholders. How am I going to disseminate this knowledge? You know, this is Miles again. You probably didn't know I was going to use him so much, but I kept on writing down his quotes. I sat on the Social Science Review Board this year. The intellectual merit was so high in so many cases that the broader impacts turned out to be what was really important. So what can graduates really say about broader impacts of your work? You need to think about that. Again, you have a really clear idea, but what you really need is this obvious relative advantage. Significance is one way to really highlight that. Methodology is one way to highlight that. Contribution, the way it speaks to broader impacts. So one of the things too is we think about how it's going to impact in our field. It has an impact more broadly, these broader perennial issues that are, you know, people face in our educational systems. How does it speak to that? So a couple things about style, and then we'll start working on your proposal pretty soon here. Position your ideas, so it's an obvious relative advantage. Keep on saying it. Start strong. Tell them something new. Maybe it's a new idea. Maybe it's an angle on an old topic. Don't start with something that they already know. Engender enthusiasm. People get excited about when they learn something new. Again, one of the benefits for them of reading these proposals is they get to learn something new, and they get to learn something from very bright doctoral students who are applying. So make it interesting for them. Make it fun. You realize that they're going to have to become an advocate for your work. Mike, when they were talking about when they sit down for those 50 proposals and they have to guess, okay, out of all these, what 20 do we end up funding? It really does come down to who can make the most persuasive argument. So to be able to share an argument, you have to have a clear idea and a clear relative advantage, and it's easier for them to make the case for you. If it's a little bit fuzzy, it's harder for them to make the case. So let them be an advocate for your work. Persuade them that your topic's not just timely, it's an opportunity for insight into some larger, more abiding problem. Again, get outside just how it contributes to the problems related to what you're addressing. Talk without being grandiose or speaking beyond the data, how it is in some ways a microcosm of some larger, more perennial issues that exist within the inequities that exist within our educational system that are more perennial. Is your idea worth spreading? Eliminate all extraneous details like the Kansas and Alabama. Ruthlessly edit. Okay, so there's one more thing about this proposal that is actually, this proposal would never pass go, ever. Even though, I mean, even in the beginning it's kind of boring, but, and the title is kind of lame. It's not interesting. You know, by the way, the title, one of the things I changed about that, there's no perennial issue in there. You're not studying after-school reading programs. You're studying how to help a population that is traditionally disadvantaged, not because of anything but its context. You're trying to let that context change so that there's this huge leverage of advantage for a population that Jack Kent Cooke would be very interested in funding. So highlighting that in your title. But there's one thing about even this proposal that would like get it not to go past go, and it's very subtle. I mean, I would almost feel like I should give a prize if somebody gets this, because I was being really crafty when I did this. Chris Wren would get it right away. She said,
the margins.
The margins, that's right. The margins, their standard word 1.25 margins, not 1-inch margins that are requested by most proposals. So, I know that's really sneaky, and I know that sounds like really nitpicky, like surely that won't happen, but it does. And I have some sample language when people get rejected. So pretend we made all the wonderful changes that you just suggested, and this is a great proposal. Remember, the first person to read it may not be like a reviewer, it might be somebody with a ruler, kind of like the person that gets your dissertation here at MSU. You know, you do all this work, and the first thing they do is pull out the ruler, and they go, 12-inch or 12.1-inch margins. It's very, very pragmatic, but it's very, very important. Absolutely, positively follow all of the instructions. You do not want to have your proposal not be read. I'm not going to really talk about the literature review and some of these other things as well. It's kind of what Mike said. You have to synthesize a lot. Well organized makes sense. Informative, selective, purposeful use of citations kind of goes back to cite the really big stuff, cite the really big names. Make sure and cite the reviewers. Don't say really, things like there's a huge gap if there's not. Make sure that this is, at this point, the literature review should be read by specialists as well as generalists. Okay, so while early on I was trying to make the case that you're kind of biasing your language towards more generalist audience, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that that specialist is going to jump to your literature review and see if you know what you're talking about. So you don't want to get in the trap of thinking, I'm just going to be writing a TED Talk for a generalist. Your literature review needs to be sophisticatedly simple, okay? Okay. Oh yeah, and this is from the Art of Writing Proposals. This is what Mike was suggesting. It's just saying basically, reviewers, their benefit is to learn from you. So consider yourself, I'm going to teach somebody something. They're going to read this proposal. It's 8 pages long, and a few minutes after they finish reading it, they're going to, you know what, I know something I didn't know, or I feel the need to address a problem I wasn't worried, I didn't know about. Methods are never glamorous, but here's a few quick things. They tell the reviewer if you know what you're doing. And you have to say your first sentence. You need to say right away, is this a qualitative study, a quantitative study? How many people am I studying? That's the very first sentence. Like Chris said, it's not a mystery novel. You need to just say right up front, this qualitative case study analysis of 4 schools is going to examine, you need to say that very first sentence, front and center. This is going to demonstrate to them kind of implicitly, not so much you're a great researcher, because everyone is. It's like, is this person really well organized? Can they spend that year really well? Type of design, main parameters, you get 1 year, well planned, feasible, some practical advice. I was saying this before. You can have 2 or 3 goals for your study, but if you kind of do the light bulb kind of effect, when with one goal doesn't go as planned, the whole thing kind of starts to fall apart. Make sure your goals are not interdependent like that. Make sure that they inspire the reviewer with confidence that if stage 1 data collection, like in the study we're doing, you already have the relationships on the ground, so you're not worried about step 1 is to get the relationships. Because if that goal fails, then you can't do step 2 and step 3 of the study. So you want to make sure you want to communicate confidence that you can do this study, and you don't want to make them nervous that, what if they can't do step 1? This whole thing's going to fall apart. And again, this is the time to highlight your obvious relative advantage. If it's methodology, make sure and highlight, again, this interview study is going to be something that policymakers will be able to act on, unlike other studies that might have taken different kinds of methodologies in the past. Title, make sure it's clear, it's the first thing. I always tell people this too, brainstorm at least 3 possible titles. Again, we fall in love with our work. I mean, do you? I fall in love with my, I mean, you're like, oh, that's so good. And you know, it can blind us from other possibilities. And so I think it's great, you know, and then kind of tell different people about your titles and see what really grabs them. Look at titles that have been funded before. With the abstract, again, it needs to be clear. It needs to say the most important parts. It's like the very first sentence, significance. I always give people the advice, draft your abstract, but don't worry about the word limitations. So don't say, I only have 200 words. Let me do this in 200 words. Don't do it in 200 words. Do the abstract as long as it needs to be. If your abstract is 500 words to begin with, that's okay. Just tell yourself, yeah, that's okay. Then say, okay, how do I make this 500 words 400 words? Not 200. Okay, you do it, you sleep on it. Okay, how do I make this 400 words 300 words? You slowly kind of go through the process. And so just realize, you know, don't, with an abstract especially, don't be too tight. Just go ahead and just write and then slowly condense over time. Set little small baby steps in between. Have a big idea, the more you can focus, the better. 8 pages is a lot. Good style, use good words, use repetition, parallel construction, stuff to use sparingly, technical vocabulary. Avoid it. If you use it, define it early and first. Okay? So, and define, if you're going to, especially some people are taking an approach that is particular to a particular field like sociology, you're going to have to define it in your abstract if that's the key component of your approach. For quoting some kind of theoretician, and you're taking that theoretical approach. So be ready to say, I'm ready to, you have to say, I'm ready to put this in my abstract and then define it right away in a way that's going to be clear and understandable quickly for the non-expert. Okay, so think about technical jargon. This is where having people outside your field read your stuff is really good. Don't have too many variables. Remember, your study doesn't do anything, you do. So never say, the study will do this, and the study will do that. Then after the study will inform. The study won't do any of these things. Study, this is, it's paper. You will do all these things. You are a person. And so don't give inanimate objects animate qualities. Things to avoid, weak verbs, is, am, are, was, were, have, has, had. Go back to junior high, English class. And cliches, this proposed state-of-the-art study is going to advance our field. Things like that. Now here's what I gave you, because I love this. And I couldn't cover it in today's thing, is there's a wonderful book called Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, which is a little bit of an overpromise. Took me a lot longer than that. But she has this diagnosis test in here that talks about how to change weak verbs. I think what's really helpful towards the end when we talk about this as a fine art, use this. There's a nice little chart here at the end. Look at all the times you're using it, and you're wasting words. Kind of like Mike said, you're wasting words. If you say on the basis of, then you've wasted some, you've wasted some words. There's probably some ways to rephrase that to make it sound more active and more efficient.
I'll just add, when I sat down and just started looking through this, I've been editing my dissertation for the last 2 months. I still wish I had had this like 2 months ago. Because each time I go through, it's like the things that they're talking about in here. I'm like, oh, I already went through that cut. And some of them I'm like, oh, I should do that now. So thank you for this article. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. No, I've been reading it's painful to reread it because it's like, I am wasting so many words and I'm writing in the passive voice so much. Why am I doing, my study was doing a lot of stuff. And I can't believe it was passable by the faculty. I'm like, what? They must have ignored it, this is good enough. We'll have them change it. But yeah, just, this is where you're just, attention to detail is important. So she covers words that need to be cut, words that might need to be added, words that need to be changed, and then quick fixes to weak phrases. Pretty helpful stuff. Reverse outline, familiar with the reverse outline idea? What a reverse outline idea is you should be able to read your paragraph and put a bullet point for each paragraph and write the main idea of that paragraph. And then, voila, it should be your outline. If it's not your outline, what it's going to do is give you a way to objectively view the structure of your argument, to say, is my structure flowing? Does each point kind of naturally flow after the one that was just made? And what do I need to maybe do? What often happens, I find this is kind of and I do this, okay, but often is one of the things I diagnose, is people put their conclusions at the end of the paragraph as opposed to, here's a point I'm about to make. And I think sometimes that works to lead people inductively, but again, I think, like Chris was saying, you want to be as explicit as possible, so sometimes stronger writing is looking at your paragraph, realizing, wait, am I putting the main point right up front? So when people are skimming and scanning this, they're seeing the structure, they're following my argument, even if they don't read it in detail, because they may not be. So, you know, it tells you how to do it there. Clear structure, read for the reviewer, spelling grammar, make sure they're make sure to read all the instructions, then measure, ruler, accepted. Here's what makes people accept your proposal, rejected. Kind of same stuff we talked about. There's a variance in the review process. And so I think something to say too, and Mike fortunately brought this up. If you don't get, and Chris said this too, if you don't get accepted, that's really not the worst thing in the world. I mean, the worst thing is not to even try, I guess. But it's, you learn something about the process. It's the thing about the hourglass was talking about at the beginning. Just do a large volume of work. If you get accepted, rejected, you know, there's a variance in the process. Miles, again, from NSF was just like, you know, I mean, it could be the same set of applications, and we're going to pick this set of 25 this time, and this set of 25 the next time. So just because you don't get accepted doesn't mean you didn't write a really good proposal. You don't have a really terrific idea. It can not be accepted for reasons that are well beyond your control, okay? So just make it your, and that's why, by the way, I purposely I named this seminar, How to Write Competitive Proposals, not How to Write Successful Proposals. Because I can't guarantee that you're successful. You can't guarantee you're successful. All you can guarantee is that you're competitive, which means you know you've done your best with your proposal. Feedback, feed forward, some quick advice about that. Feed forward. This is where the one-page thing comes in. Don't write your 8-page proposal and say, hey, advisor, what do you think? How do you think? This thing is going to be pretty competitive? Write your first page, maybe your second page. And what I mean by that is write a really good page 1, which takes a lot of work, and then say, so what do you think about this? And then what you're looking for feedback on is, what do you know about the field that'll give this a nice little twist, a good little edge that's going to make it really competitive? And so what can you tell me? So feed forward means before you write the whole proposal, write the first page, go to people you trust, say, how do I make this even better than it is? And then use that to write the rest of the proposal, okay? Feedback means towards the very end, what you really want to do is, and I'm going to probably hire somebody to copy edit my dissertation because I am so tired of looking at it. But you need to get feedback because it's, you will? Okay. Oh, good, we'll talk about it. I'm serious about that. But get feedback. Is it clear writing? Is it good writing? Is it understandable as you think it is? Find time, you'll never make it, or make time, you'll never find it. Remember, they're looking for faces. You know, they want to see your face right up there. These are people who've been funded, but they're funding people, like Mike was saying. They're funding your future. They want to invest in the future, and they want to make a really good investment. So make sure to tell them the whole story. Tell them why you'd be a good way. Make your story personal. And what I mean by, what are some things that only you could write about your life history? Something that's really unique to you. And like Mike said, there's only so much time. You don't get to tell everything that might even be interesting. But what made this idea emerge for you? A really compelling story is the way that reviewer is going to connect with you. The other thing is, remember, it's not just personal. Okay? This is very strategic. They want to know that you're going to be successful afterwards, and they want to know you're going to be able to execute this project successfully. So communicate professionally as well. Don't just be personal. Integrated, well prepared. You're in an environment that supports you. Michigan State, you already have that. Think about long-term goals as well as short-term goals. Again, you want to connect these. What are your long-term goals? And what you're trying to say is the short-term research project's going to help me achieve that long-term goal. Okay? It's not enough to say, I like this book. Don't just say, I'm going to be a researcher. Usually that's not competitive if you're not a genius. So his point was, people are going to become a researcher. What kind of researcher? An interesting person proposed, I know to Spencer this year, who's not interested in an academic career. A lot of people think you need to do that. This person's proposal is interested in policy in DC. But based on their personal story and their thing, it's going to make perfect sense to that reviewer. I think it's going to be very competitive because they clearly communicate there's a future here, and then what I'm researching now is going to have some policy impacts if I get to do this research study. You get the funded budget. You can read that later. Letters of recommendation, you kind of heard this from Chris. Then edit ruthlessly, all that stuff too. So let's look at your proposal. We have about 10 or 15 minutes. Hopefully this was a good use of your time. And so what I think I'd like to do is, why don't you just kind of look at what you brought, and if you've been thinking about some things, why don't you just start marking it up of, you know, let me look at the title, let me look at that opening paragraph. Does it have a critical need? Who are my audiences? Who are my stakeholders? What's the objective of this study? What's my obvious relative advantage? Start thinking of some of these key ideas and just start making some notes to the side. Begin kind of that editing process. And I'll kind of wander around and feel free to talk to people around. This is, kind of the informal.